This episode is sponsored by this cupcake, which you should really try. I mean, come on, it has sprinkles.
Take a look to your right. Who do you see? Don't be shy. There are no wrong answers here.
I see a caring human being.
No?
Family drama is awful to go through, but makes for darn good TV. Originally, I was going to do a deep dive into how the Hills fall into their addiction, and I will certainly touch on those elements, but while doing my rewatch, I was shocked to see what a superstar Luanne is in this one, and I really want to center this discussion on her. Confronting a problem like this, one where your extended family is getting into a destructive but all too easy to ignore habit, is going to be tough no matter who you are. My own father secretly smoked for years, and we all sort of knew in the background, but we didn't have the courage to confront the uncomfortable situation. And to my dad's credit, he did quit for over 15 years, and only started again when my sister got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but still, to this day, I sometimes feel guilty that I didn't have the strength of character that Luanne shows here. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give you the whole big speech about how bad smoking is, mostly because I think it's silly to expect that someone's going to go on YouTube and make this huge life change based off of the advice of a cartoon skeleton man, but also because I think Luanne already makes a pretty decent direct appeal to the audience herself.
Don't you know that more people die of smoking than die of war in Vietnam every day? I'm begging you, put out your cigarettes and keep them out.
Subtle. Very, very subtle. And speaking more broadly, I think the episode does an amazing job of portraying the imagined perfection of smoking versus some very harsh realities. They aren't necessarily making an argument one way or the other, but instead showing the facts of what will happen if you spend your life smoking. And the worst thing about smoking is that after a certain point, your body becomes so damaged that even if you manage to quit, it's kinda already too late. I mean, not to get too personal here, but I have an uncle who smoked since he was like 16, and he recently passed away this December of lung-related complications at only 64, so this stuff comes with a very real and very heavy cost. So yeah, sorry, I said I wasn't gonna preach about it, but just... trust me, there are much better things for you to spend your money on. As a matter of fact, can we get a quick list up? Astounding. And with all of that unsolicited financial and health advice out of the way, let's begin the review.
Smoke.
The episode opens with Hank and Peggy doing it in the bathroom, it being code for cleaning the shower grout, when Luanne comes barging in and ruins the whole mood.
Oh, for goodness sakes, Hank, you are fully clothed.
Next time, I might not be so lucky.
Luanne is upset because Hank's dog, Ladybird, has recently gotten into Luanne's makeup. This gives Hank the opportunity to take a rather low blow at one of the cornerstones of my heart.
Didn't Luanne make you look pretty, pretty dog? Who's a pretty dog? Get that stuff off of her. She looks like Fran Drescher.
And look, we don't tolerate any Drescher degradation in this house. We don't take kindly to that sort of talk. She was in Spinal Tap, for Christ's sakes. She was the nanny, so keep her name out of your mouth, Hank. I'm just so furious that we have to move on to the next scene, in which Bobby and Joseph are rooting around in a dumpster, trying to get tetanus, no doubt, when they discover something slightly less sexy.
Manitoba 100, the official cigarette of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Darn Canadians, filling our dumpsters with their inferior tobacco. Next thing you know, they'll be filling our lungs with all kinds of smoke. Oh, that's awkward. Well, don't worry, I know your pain. I'm from California. We get the same kind of gunk over here every once in a while. As a matter of fact, here's a picture that I took a few years ago when we had a bunch of wildfires going crazy. And speaking of gunk, Bobby and Joseph head into the bathroom to try out their ill-gotten Canadian goods, to which Hank immediately catches them. Now, for the longest time, I was completely baffled as why Hank would even be here. I mean, talk about the most convenient thing ever, right? But then I noticed at the very beginning of this scene, we see Hank's truck stopped at this gas station. And so I guess this means that either he was driving Bobby and Joseph around and they were just stupid enough to try smoking at the same place where Bobby's dad is fueling up just around the corner, or this is one of the weirdest coincidences ever where they happen to pick the right dumpster at the wrong gas station and it all just kind of cascaded into this big convenient thing. But let's not get wrapped up in those nitty-gritty details. We have to start hitting Bobby with the old traditional family guilt stick.
Cancer, heart disease, emphysema.
I thought those were the ingredients.
And poor Luanne gets caught in the crossfire, with Peggy cruelly stating that only trailer trash smoke these days.
Now, do you want to look like trailer trash?
That's not fair. I don't smoke.
And while Peggy is busy putting out that tire fire, Hank decides to dust off an old tradition, punishing Bobby by forcing him to smoke an entire carton of cigarettes. And I want to say a few things about this, because this is actually kind of crazy. First of all, this trope is apparently called the, quote, radish cure, and is based off of an episode of a TV show called, Mrs. Pigglewiggle, in which a girl refuses to take a bath because she hates them so much, and then they let her go weeks without bathing, forcing her to get caked in layers of filth until she's practically begging for a bath. Some will call it child neglect, I call it teaching them a darn lesson. Although that sort of story sounds like it belongs more to like an Aesop fable, some long-standing tradition. Oh, and by the way, fun fact, I actually played Aesop himself in this acting troupe I was in college, and gosh, the kids hated me. Whenever we'd go to like an elementary school and put on the show, I was just the boring guy who got in the way of all the fun parts of the story. They're like, yeah, old guy, keep, talk, get through it. We want to get to the fun stories. And I'm just like, well, you don't know about sharing. But anyway, Hank's idea is quite the outdated thing to do, the kind of thing you might expect to see on Leave It to Beaver or Judge Dredd, which I guess that makes sense given that Hank is a super old school kind of guy, but boy does he go completely overboard. I thought this whole trope was just to be about smoking a whole pack, which has 20 cigarettes in it, that's still quite a lot, but instead Hank goes for the full ass, full blast, full carton, which has 200 of the damn things. Meanwhile, we cut over to the Gribble household and see that Dale is giving Joseph a more even-handed approach, giving him access to this big government report on smoking and an adorable little bit of pop-up propaganda. It's actually quite surprising that we've only got little glimpses of Dale so far, but don't worry, he'll come in like a firestorm in the next episode. In the meantime, we see that Hank is getting in some legendary commentary on Bobby's smoking habits.
Bobby, what nationality are you?
American.
Then why are you holding your cigarette like some kind of European Nazi in the movie?
Unfortunately, Hank takes this way too far and gets sucked back into the gravitational pull of his old habit. And this is so darn realistic to how some people can find themselves falling back into their old addictions. I myself have been trying to give up soda for years and years. I'll go 6 months, completely 6 months, totally fine without any desire at all, but then I'll go to the movies and think, why not, it's a special occasion, and then boom, I'm right back in the slippery grip of Dr. Pepper, and I find myself desiring squirt after squirt. And much like my harassment by Pepsi Man, Hank finds himself tormented by smooth jazz. He makes up some excuse to go outside, saying something about leaving the blender on, and heads outside to spark up. But he's not alone. Instead of curing Bobby's desire for cigarettes, it turns out that Hank's radish cure has only turned the boy into a little spicy pepper.
Yeah, that line could be better. Who wrote this crap?
Also, can I just voice my appreciation for how cool this overhead shot is? That pan down to Bobby's side of the house is just so darn awesome. The small little red light from Bobby and Hank's cigarettes is a great touch too. It just places the viewer in this sort of like omnipresent perspective that we rarely get from the show. It's trying to get us emotionally invested in the events by showing us the consequences that the other characters aren't aware of yet, setting us up for a nice bit of suspense. From here, we see that Hank and Bobby are struggling to get through their days, their minds clearly preoccupied by the thoughts of smoking. On Bobby's end, he is tormented by this giant billboard promoting, quote, recess cigarettes, which is just like the weirdest thing ever, what the fuck? And Hank sees his co-worker, Enrique, enjoying a nice smoke out back.
Smoke.
Interestingly, this is the first appearance of Enrique, and he is voiced by Eloy Casados, who voices Enrique until 1999, until he's eventually replaced by crazy old Danny Trejo himself. And while Trejo is a legend through and through, I do think that Casados does bring a certain groundedness to Enrique that is somewhat lacking from Trejo's often over-the-top performance.
I'd be honored for you to meet my family, Mr. Hill.
And I'd be honored for you to meet my wife.
In any case, Hank pretends to be interested in Enrique's life story just so he can bump a cigarette off of him, and I like how they're sitting on top of propane tanks while doing this. Oh my god, what are you doing? I'm going to remember this when we get to the Megalomart explosion, because Hank is clearly not using his precious common sense here. I guess smelling all those fumes did give him a bit of brain damage. This dangerousness goes into maximum overdrive when we see that Hank nearly flicks his cigarette at the most unsafe propane silo I have ever seen, and it's funny because I don't think we ever see Enrique smoking after this scene, so I choose to believe that this near-death experience really scared him straight. And speaking of getting scared straight, Luanne baits Ladybird into eating some makeup she left on the floor, and then scares the crap out of her by rattling a can.
Is your heart racing? Are you upset? Now you know how I feel when you eat my makeups.
And I'm sorry, Luanne, but that dog is definitely way too old to learn such aversion strategies, so all you're really doing is just torturing the poor old pooch. Luanne shaking her cans aside, here's where I have to point out something that's always really bugged me. Just 2 scenes ago, Hank was so dedicated to hiding his smoking habit from Peggy that he almost killed Enrique, but now he's just casually pulling out a pack to smoke in public. I get that they have to move this plot forward, and maybe Hank is just so in need of his fix that he's willing to shoot his shot, but it doesn't exactly blend well. It feels a little clunky, you know what I mean? But it's alright, I can forgive a little bit of clunkiness, mostly because it gets us to this very cute flashback montage of a super young and very romantically inclined Hank and Peggy. And this is another insidious way of getting someone back into their old habits, tying their memories of joy in with their addictive behavior. This not only gets Peggy to break, but it's interesting that Hank is so insistent on getting her back aboard the Puff Puff Express. It's almost like misery needs company, and if Hank were doing this all by himself, then his guilt might get the better of him, and he might stop. But with Peggy having snapped too, she can't scold him for enjoying himself, because then that would make her one hell of a hypocrite. And yet, under their noses, Bobby is going through some pretty tough withdrawal symptoms, which isn't funny, but the way he taps his sausage definitely is.
You start talking about your stupid tile. If it's so dirty, go clean it, and if it's clean, you can shut up!
I also love how Bobby's trying to get some secondhand smoke, and when he's caught, he just sort of slides back behind that bench. Something about him retreating like that, as if he's going back into stealth mode, is just so wonderfully silly. Also, if he wants some real secondhand smoke, he should just go hang out with Dale. But I guess that's not an option because Dale hasn't quite become his full character yet. And here's where we arrive at my favorite joke in the episode. It's where Hank and Peggy go back to their old jazz club and ask to be seated in the smoking section. Unable to tolerate his parents' selfish enjoyment, Bobby tries to burn the frickin' house down, but chickens out at the last second and uses his pillow to put out the flame. Now, I'm no scientician, but a pillow sounds like one of the worst things you could use to fight fires, right between a gas-soaked jockstrap and an empty fire extinguisher. And you know, let's take a moment here to appreciate how utterly blank Bobby's room is. That boy lives in a damn cell. It's no wonder he wants to start smoking. His life sucks. Get that boy an N64. And this is where, finally, Luanne comes into play and she makes a genuine plea for them to stop. And for a little while, her pleas actually work. The Hills even go to a self-help sort of AA-style group, which apparently is called the Cigarenders, which my mind immediately thought said cisgenders. Funny how stuff like that works. At the meeting, we get a bunch of quotable quotes from Hank, which is very typical for when Hank is put up against a sort of feel-good therapist figure. And of all of these great moments, of which I highly encourage you to watch for yourself, I think this one is my favorite.
I've got the strangest feeling someone's gonna kick his ass.
Damn. I still use that one from time to time. It's gold, I tell you, gold! That night, we see that the Hills are really struggling to get over their withdrawals, and even though Luanne is being the angel that she is, the Hills can't see her actions as anything but annoying.
I know y'all don't mean none of those harsh words. It's just a nicotine withdrawal.
Why is she still talking?
And this gets at a larger point about dealing with someone who has an addiction. You are definitely going to want to be as compassionate as you can, but at a certain point, if you want them to quit, then things are going to get tough for everyone. In trying to help her family, Luanne treats them like animals. And I was going to call this out as being a little weird, but you know, maybe that's a fair thing to do, considering how crazy Bobby gets when he gets a hold of a nicotine patch.
Bobby, the patch goes on your shoulder. Bobby! Bobby!
From here, the night deepens into this unusually shadowed kitchen scene, and at first I was going to say that maybe there's a storm raging outside and that's why the power went out, but in the next scene we see that the lights are on, so this is all just for dramatic effect. Similarly, when Luanne sees her family about to tear each other limb from limb, she traps them in Hank and Peggy's bedroom, locking the door with pennies. Now, I'm not sure if this trick actually works with a door that opens inward, but I've never had to lock anyone inside a room, so I'm just going to put my hands up and say I'm sorry, I'm ignorant to the fine mechanics of using pennies to trap people. And thank goodness Luanne just happens to have a pocket full of pennies at the ready. Guess she came prepared for the worst case scenario. And why does Luanne have this strong of a reaction? Well, let's let her speak for herself.
I'm sick of dysfunctional families. I came from one, and I'm not going to let it happen to you. Function! Function, damn you!
God, that is such a heartbreaking line to hear, but it also goes a really long way in communicating just how seriously Luanne takes her role in the Hill family. These aren't just a bunch of people that she happens to be related to, these are people she genuinely cares about and wants to see stay happy. I mean, in a very real way, these are the only people she has left in her life. Her mother's gone, her father has been forked, Buckley is probably still eating his way through that box of chocolates, and all the girls at beauty school are just one-dimensional jerks. I really just feel for Luanne in this episode. Her shouting at them to function, damn you, is just so frickin' raw. Ugh. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of love to do that, and I think it was really smart of the writers to pit Luanne against the lowest versions of the main cast. It shows that she's got their backs no matter what, she is willing to go to extreme lengths to protect them, and she has the strength of character to do something that may make her hated, but will be best in the long run. What a gal. Now that Hank, Bobby, and Peggy are trapped with only one cigarette, the Hills devolve into these rather unsettling off-model versions of themselves, and it's quite the bold look, really communicates their inner turmoil. To further symbolize their night of agony, a storm has come to town and begins to wreak havoc on the neighborhood, from ripping off the cigarette ad at Bobby's school to sending a bit of special flavor to a nearby jail. God, that is such a Beavis and Butthead joke, I swear. Once the night is past, the Hills emerge to find their neighborhood has been destroyed, but they have come out of it free of their addiction. And it's fair to say that this is a bit of a miracle ending, where just suddenly all the problems are taken care of in one night, but do we really need to see them going through months and months of this shit? Nah, so it's fine that they get to slay their demons in just one night. And in the end, we get a direct-to-camera bit of advice from a rather unexpected source.
Yo, listen up, man. This Boomhauer. Let your lungs on air. Let your lungs on smoke. See the difference, man?
I'm not sure why, but Boomhauer is just the perfect person for this segment. I wouldn't have taken this seriously if it had come from Bill, and Dale is obviously a no-go, and we've already had a couple of these from Hank, so why not Boomhauer? It's a really silly thing to give him, but hey, it deepens his presence in the show, so bravo for giving us a little character-to-viewer advice.
Gonna give you low sperm count, man. Give him ear hair, yo.
Phew, what a ride. So how was this depiction of addiction, gloom, drama, and personal strife? Well, you know, I think it was done rather masterfully. Going into this topic, there are a ton of ways to fumble the plot. It could have come off as too high and mighty, or too middle of the road, or, worst of all, it may have even made monsters out of people who are genuinely trying to quit. There's definitely a narrow line to walk, because while you want to make it clear that quitting is always an option and sometimes people don't make the best decision for themselves, even if they have the resources and support to do so, you also don't want to make a situation where you trivialize the seriousness of this issue. Because addiction is truly something of a lifelong struggle, there's a reason why some people need to take certain measures to ensure they don't fall back into life-destroying habits, be that drug use, gambling, or catgirls.
Meow, look at me, I'm a kitty. Meow.
And really, I think the writers did an amazing job in showing how people get into these sort of things, from Bobby's lighthearted experiment to Hank's creeping interest to go back to his old ways, and the emotional manipulation that Peggy endures. But very smartly, they had Luanne placed at the core of the story. As someone who grew up in a rather poor environment, both literally and figuratively, Luanne has no doubt had many opportunities to start smoking.
Are you smoking yet?
But because of how awful her parents were, she has no positive memories or emotions linked to the act of smoking, making her strongly against it, which perfectly counterbalances the rest of the family. There really is a lot of stuff that is left unspoken in Luanne's background, and I think it's mainly because it's all just so darn sad. And sure, being stabbed with a fork is a bit absurd, but Luanne lived in an extremely small trailer with her horrible parents for 17 years. Frankly, it's a miracle that she turned out as good as she did, and I always appreciate how she is able to keep such a positive attitude about life. And sure, she'll cry at the drop of a hat. I mean, she cries at weddings, she cries at funerals, there's no rhyme or reason to it. But hey, we all need a good cry now and again. I mean, crying is cathartic, it gets you in the mood for sleeping, and it's free! Free! Life is truly a banquet, and tears are the palate-cleansing garlic that helps you move past the foods that are no longer available. Huh, or maybe I need to do some crying as penance for torturing this poor metaphor. But hey, while I would love to make amends for imaginary offenses, I've got bigger fish to fry. In fact, I think our next discussion is going to be one of the most fulfilling so far, because we have one hell of a character to spotlight. And you better get ready, because in the next episode we are finally going to see the glorious arrival of one of King of the Hill's greatest characters, Mr. Dale Gribble himself, in all of his full and paranoid glory.
I'm denying that. That's my position.
Dale, you wrote it on this map. 3 a.m., planted ants.
If all you're going on is my confession, forget it. I'm simply not credible.
Finally, Dale is no longer just a side character that will occasionally get in a good line here or there. He is about to earn his way into the upper echelons of animated TV history. I just hope I can do Dale justice, because he definitely deserves my best. But we'll have to see how that goes next time. Until then, we can say that this episode, titled Keeping Up with Our Joneses, has indeed been reviewed to death. Thanks for watching, and, for real, take care of yourself, folks. You deserve it.
Hey! Get off my property!
Luanne! For God's sakes!
Ouch.